Hello, everybody, and welcome to All in the Game, a podcast all about The Wire, what I consider to be one of the greatest television shows, not just of the 21st century, but of all time. It is one that has both been analyzed by scholars, but also given a huge wave of resurgence just in the past 10-15 years. So, The Wire is a crime drama that premiered on June 2nd, 2002, and ended on March 9th, 2008 for 5 seasons, and it was written by David Simon and Ed Burns predominantly. They were the showrunners. David Simon was a police reporter for the Baltimore Sun that you could see how The Wire possibly came to his mind. He had a few shows before, like The Corner and Homicide: Life on the Streets, which both were Baltimore, and The Wire was Baltimore. And Ed Burns was a police officer for the Baltimore PD turned public school teacher, which is a pretty familiar trait for someone that's watched The Wire before. There's a character that also has a similar arc to that. So, how do I even possibly preface discussing a show of such caliber, of that's so deep and so entrenched, and that is willing to discuss the problems of society that typically are either ignored or even outright denied? The Wire, it's a show that delves into the societal rot that is created by poverty. That's its overlying theme. Like, that's what the show builds upon with every one of the 5 seasons. It builds upon that theme. The said poverty leads to the kind of violent crime that the show is littered with and shows up in spades. In the simplest terms, The Wire is about how ineffective the war on drugs is to everybody and how no one comes out a winner. And it will show this throughout each institution that is covered across the aforementioned 5 seasons, and how they each bleed into each other and they actually worsen the effect of the war on drugs on everybody, and how nothing is being done properly to solve this issue, and it's only being perpetuated. There will be spoilers within. I probably should say, mostly in episode 2. Episode 1 will be mostly an overview and what the show means and what the characters mean, but episode 2 will almost be very spoiler ridden. So if that's a concern to you and you don't want to be spoiled, here is your warning. But episode 1 should probably be generally okay. I will reference a few things here and there might be talk of things that happen in later in the show that you probably won't be spoiled. So this is your warning. So now, without any further ado, let's cue the theme song.
If you walk through the garden, you better watch your back. But I beg your pardon, walk a straight and narrow track. If you walk with Jesus, he'll save your soul. You gotta keep the devil down in the hole.
So I think the best way to start would be discussing what makes The Wire's characters so engaging in what they do that emphasizes the show's exploration of urban life in 21st century America. So I think most people know. If you don't know, The Wire takes place in Baltimore, Maryland, and obviously in a city that's 60% black. The Wire is a show that really paves the way in telling realistic, unglamorized, completely puts it all on the table stories of black people and their lives, especially in a dense city. So, probably the most famous character of the show is Omar Little. He really, for a show that came out in 2002, he was a prominent, completely unexaggerated, completely real gay character. He was a homosexual stick up man that basically was a badass while also being gay at the same time. Like almost all of his scenes he's shown with one of his multiple partners he has throughout the show. Like obviously in the life he has, he either loses a partner, they leave him, whatever, but you almost never see him generally without one of his men or in one of his crews. He's amazing. He has some of the most iconic scenes and quotes. That's his the quote that I started this podcast with, like the quote that is the title of the podcast, all in the game. He was the first one to say that in the show, and in the season 1 finale, pulls down his hood, puts his gun up. He hasn't been on screen in 3 episodes. He finally shows up and says, "It's all in the game, yo." And that closes out the first season. It's very iconic. So I think a quote that really exemplifies Omar as a character would be a scene from season 1, episode 7, One Arrest, in which he's talking to Bunk, basically giving the police some info, specifically homicide info on a murder he knows about. And it's just a great scene, and he has a great line. I'll play it for you.
So you're my eyeball witness, huh? So why'd you step up on this?
Bird trifling, basically. Kill an everyday working man and all. I mean, don't get it twisted. I do some dirt too, but I ain't never put my gun on nobody who wasn't in the game.
A man must have a code.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah, it's just a great scene between Bunk Moreland and Omar Little, showing two men on completely different sides of the law. One being a homicide detective, the other being a stick-up man that has likely committed his fair share of murders, basically finding some common ground in that they both live by a certain code, while Omar, generally in the eyes of the law, is seen as this criminal scumbag. He's really humanized, and throughout the entire first season especially, we get so much humanizing characteristics for this person that really in any other piece of media could be seen as this completely awful, disgusting person. An aspect of the show that truly sets The Wire apart from basically anything else is that it really truly doesn't have a main character. Like, there's a couple characters people point to as like being the show's focus, but even then, I think most characters get an equal amount of screen time per season. Like, we pretty much get every character in, and everyone's given their fair share of screen time and moments and quotes, that it's just impossible to say this character is the main. But I think the character that probably fits the bill the most for what most people would can latch onto as the leading man would be Jimmy McNulty. And he's just basically a deconstruction of the lone wolf cop stereotype that most cop shows will give us as our main character, like this detective that the bosses hate, that is always trying to do the best job they can. While McNulty is very good at what he does, he is a serial cheater, womanizer, is just an ass, always makes an ass of himself, is just so obsessed with the job and so has his brain solely focused on the job that his entire life is basically a mess. You even get characters like Lester Freeman pointing this out, who are like, bro, like, it's just really funny watching this stereotype of a character get deconstructed over the show, where you at first see him as, oh, this guy's going to be the hero, he's going to solve the case, he's going to get everything done, basically constantly thinking he's smarter than everybody else, thinking he's better than everybody else. Like, he might be good at his job, but what else does he have other than that? And I really do, I love McNulty as a character, but he can be really frustrating when he gets in his own way sometimes. and he's a great representation of, like, hey, look, even the people that technically are doing their job and doing the right thing may not be the best people. While McNulty may be the representation of the homicide detective cop character stereotype, we have a character that's definitely meant to be his rival throughout like the first half of the show, Stringer Bell, Russell Stringer Bell, who's played by Idris Elba, who has went on to do so many roles, and he plays a very convincing drug lord, like kind of like this business oriented drug lord character, and like his American accent's so good it could be really hard to tell sometimes that this man's actually British, but he's meant to be this guy that wants to reform the game, who wants to be like, who wants to gradually go into legitimate business, but it's clear throughout how he's seen and how he's portrayed that it's a pipe dream in a world that he can really only be seen as this ruthless gangster, and he's only able to play that role. He can't break into legitimate business. He's brought down by his own hubris. That's just what he's supposed to be seen as. He can't reform the game because the game in a society led by a capitalist system just isn't going to be reformed, especially when we have more ruthless people come along to try and sweep up the crown. Which brings me into, I guess, a group of characters, which would be where we see at the beginning of the show the main kingpin, Avon Barksdale, and how the game basically forms someone like Marlo Stanfield. Avon, he's like this representative of the old guard. Like, he's the kingpin that is kind of community focused. Obviously, he's still a murderous person. He drops bodies. That's the whole reason the show even gets started, with McNulty going to the judge and what they refer to as mouthing off to the judge, saying that that Avon's dropping bodies in the Western District, and the judge needs to basically call the police station into action to actually catch the bad guy, which is how they refer to it. Obviously, it's seen a bit more morally ambiguous in that the cops aren't always the good guys, and the drug dealers and addicts aren't always these villains. That they can be, regardless of the side of the law they're on. We can see them have some human traits. Like Avon in the second episode of the show, he's doing this community cookout where he's cooking, he's talking to everyone, being all cheerful and nice, and like talking his nephew in, who his nephew just got out of jail and was demoted in his position. So yeah. So Avon's basically this kingpin that is seen as this community figurehead. And then you later in the show, you get Marlo Stanfield, who he's basically a serial killer. He leads his guys, and he has them kill people for very minor things. Like, someone will say something about him. Someone will, let's say, call him a name. Like, that happens, and he basically has his guys go up and murder his entire family. And that's Marlo Stanfield. He gets very rare, if at all, any humanizing moments or traits. He's basically just this ruthless, cold-blooded killer. And it's scary sometimes, because you're like, what is this guy gonna do? Like, he's just killing people because he can. He ends up, his crew and the Stanfield organization drops 22 bodies by the end of season 4. It's just insane. Like, and the characters are always talking how the game is, how the guys are a new breed. The game only gets rougher. The world goes warmer, but the game only gets colder, which is something Poot says at one point in the show, like as a reference to obviously climate change. Like, again, with the show constantly talking about real world elements and then showing how the world might be getting warmer, people and communities and the world around them is only really getting colder towards each other. People are really only focused on the individual, and that's something The Wire critiques about capitalism in particular, and it's just really great. I love that how we get Avon to Marlowe, as evil as they both are, we get one that's really humanized, another that's as cold and vicious as possible. This idea is meant to signify how people aren't brought, like, they don't become something in a world that doesn't help them. They're products of their environment first and foremost. Like, we get this idea that these characters become who they are, and that's even explored near the end of the show, where we get like the school kids from season 4, in which we see the 4 of them become other characters. Like, we'll see Michael become a stick-up man, just like Omar. Dookie will be an addict, just like Bubbles, who we'll touch on in a minute. Naaman is the only of the 4 kids to really get a good ending, and we see him like maybe either as like a Clay Davis figure, who I mentioned earlier with Stringer trying to go legit. Clay Davis basically was a politician that kind of screwed him over, and Randy, the 4 kids, who basically gets put in a group home and becomes someone like his uncle, prop great uncle. Some of the character relations are strange, and they don't touch on a lot of them sometimes. But yeah, it's The Wire. It shows how people can be products of their environment despite how good natured they might be. The system comes in, chews them up, and spits them out. So just like I was talking about, we'll talk about Reginald Cousins, aka Bubbles, who's supposed to be our addict POV of the show. So we get the drug dealers, we get the police. We'll have like we'll have the unions, the dock workers, the unions, politicians, and even the educators and the school kids themselves. But Bubbles is our look into the addicts, the ones who are completely discarded and forgotten by the system. A lot of them are homeless. Bubbles is like a squatter. He constantly goes in and out of places where he's living. And at the end of season 1, we see a little bit of hope. He finally is going to get clean. He goes and is in the basement of his sister because she won't let him upstairs because of him kind of screwing her over in the past by stealing her stuff and selling it. But then in season 2, we don't see him for a few episodes, and we eventually finally see him in the background, and he's looting and stealing and trying to get by again. We kind of realize he fell back into his drug use because of the trauma that I'll touch on mostly in episode 2 that he faced in season 1. He generally gets a mostly good ending, but he falls some major pitfalls. He gets 2 of his proteges end up dying, one of them indirectly and the other pretty directly involved with him. It definitely was his lowest moment, and he tried to turn himself into the police. He tried to hang himself, but he was saved. He ended up finally getting clean by the end of the show, and again, just like Naaman, he's one of the very few characters who really get a good ending and actually get a second chance and are meant to be that. There are happy endings sometimes, but they're more of an exception to the rule rather than being the usual in this game we call life, especially in the US with our systems that tend to prioritize the rich and capitalism and all that. Definitely The Wire can be read very much as we're meant to see this stuff is not good and that something needs to change, and how the system just doesn't allow proper change. Things need to they need to be properly dealt with. Things need to be uprooted entirely. Things need to be completely stopped before proper change can really occur in a system like this. Things really need to be different. But anyways, Bubbles, he's very heartwarming. He's supposed to be lovable, and it's fantastic how they did it with an added character, someone who is a petty thief, but like we're still human. We still get humanized. We still feel that he does what he does only out of necessity, only because he just can't catch a break sometimes. And it's really sad, even when he does things that we might not like. We're just like, this guy, we feel bad for him. He's a police informant, so that's really the thing that we end up seeing the most out of him is when he works with the police on their wiretaps and he gets them information and he is an undercover. He's a CI, so he does all that, and we get some funny moments, but also some heartrending moments with him. And he's both like the comic relief, but also has his own dark story. Anyways, I do have to move on despite the fact that there's so many more characters and moments I can talk about. I do need to go to another topic. Those were like some of the major characters that I'm talking about. There's like 10, 15 more of them that I could discuss, but I just don't really have them. I can discuss them more uh, either at the end of this episode or in episode 2 when I get there. Um, so, how did I even find this show in the first place, right? I was a Breaking Bad fan. I loved Breaking Bad. I loved Better Call Saul. Eventually, I saw The Sopranos. And then after The Sopranos, pretty much everyone, when talking about HBO, raved about The Wire and how The Wire is just as good as or even better, and it might even be the best show of all time. And I was like, I have to check this out, right? So originally I watched the first season, and then I got through the couple of episodes of season 2, and then school got busy. I guess I just wasn't as interested as I could be, so I kind of checked out, and I didn't even think I was ever going to go back. But then one day, like a few months later, I was just like, you know what, I really want to get back into The Wire, but I had to like realize that I would have to restart the show because I just forgot most of it. So I restarted, I watched it, and then maybe a month or so after that, I did a second watch. And then right now I'm on a third watch of the show. So I've seen this show quite a bit. There's 60 episodes, 5 seasons. It's every episode's an hour or more. And I've seen it all multiple times. It's fantastic. I learn more and more the more I watch. It's one of those shows where it really never gets, you never get tired of it, but you actually like it more. I've actually liked storylines and moments more the more I've watched it, which is really hard to do. It's really hard to make a show that's just as engaging, or even more so, the more watches you do. It's just so great. Like, again, you can make it because the show's like doesn't really have a main character. You're following so many different characters that you can focus on one during another rewatch, and you can get so much more enjoyment out of focusing on different people and thinking about their stories and feeling their characters and the storylines that they all time. Like, you'll start a season and everything will be scattered, everyone will be doing their own thing. The police, the units, their detail, like that does the major crimes, that does the wiretaps that we see generally, always start the season wildly apart, and then everyone finally comes together near the end of the season. It's just not your typical cop show, despite it technically being a cop show. It's so much more than that. It's a show that examines the conditions a society puts people in, and poverty, especially the war on drugs, how this stuff doesn't actually do the help it's supposed to. And it's so fantastically done. It's so engaging. Yes, it's a slow burn, but it's engaging every step of the way, and the details always matter. All the pieces matter, just like Lester Freeman says. And it just makes it so unique. Love it. All right. So I've been saying it multiple times, but again, not your average cop show. The investigations, the wiretaps that they do on the Barksdales in season 1, season 2 when they do it on the Frank Zapaka and the port unions in season 3. It's season 3 is different because we actually start the season in the middle of the wiretap, but it's struggling. So like we see them struggling to get this wiretap off the ground. So like every season actually condenses the wiretap further. Season 4, I actually don't even think there is one, because Major Crimes is basically just is like basically being buried by the department, by the commissioner, is send someone in to basically bury the department and make them useless. Season 5, they have to set up an illegal one because they can't get it any other way after the events of season 4. After mentioned earlier that they found the bodies that Marlowe killed, the 22 people that Marlowe killed, and they had them posted up in the vacants and sealed them, and they finally uncovered all of these bodies inside these vacant buildings. They wanted to catch Marlowe, Lester, and McNulty. They talked about McNulty being a rogue and also being kind of an ass. They had to set up an illegal wiretap. They get caught at the end of the season, but it's like it's most cop shows won't usually go there. They're going to have the cops be these good guys that are doing right, and the department's gonna be like, here's all this money, here's all these resources to do these investigations. Everyone's at a disadvantage. That's like most of these cops that we're supposed to think are doing good are just like screwing over their own people and only care about the stats of the city, seeing how the murder rates. That's all they care about. They don't care about actually the investigations and actually helping their community. They don't care about any of that. And with like movements like all cops are bad in real life and stuff like that, you really begin to see why people believe this stuff and how communities can become so against the police. And even more interesting, in the second season, they actually like fail at capturing their actual target. Like that's just mind blowing. Most cop shows will never do that. Investigation shows always either end an episode or end the season with their target capture. But season 2, like they get some of the people, but like the actual villains of the story get by scot free and flee the country. Like that's insane. And the only ones that get out scot free are the white ones. The white bad guys, the ones that are basically ignored or even not even known about, get off scot free. Well, everybody else is captured up. All their underlings are swooped up. And I love how the dealers and the addicts, they get so much sympathy and sympathetic traits. Obviously, with the exception of like Marlowe, Chris Bartlow, and Snoop, where they're the Stanfield organization. They're the bad guys for the second half of the show. But like that's kind of the purpose. Is we're meant to see them how different they are than Avon, Barksdale, Stringer Bell, and the Barksdale organization. It's so sympathetic to have these characters and people be seen as real humans for the most part, and the bad guys who are bad, we're seeing why they're bad. So even if they don't get as much sympathy as like a murderer, like hitman guy like Weebay in the earlier seasons, Chris, who's basically that role for Marlowe in the later seasons, we know why he's the way he is, just because that's just what they believe they have to do. Even great, and like another great aspect of the show is that there's so much there's a lot of bookending. So like the show starts with like McNulty doing his thing and being on the force, and it ends with him eventually being kicked off because of what he does, that he does an illegal wiretap and fakes some crimes, and eventually gets kicked off the force quietly. But it's bookended in a way to where he's in the same place in his life. He doesn't, like, he might be slightly better off by the end, but he's really just in the same place of his life. But everyone else, like we talked about, the kids that become the old that replace the old guard, so everyone's in the same place. The game is in the same place, but the world keeps on moving and moving and moving. And we even get at the end, the final montage. Every season ends with a really cool montage that's some awesome music. And the final season montage is actually just the season 1 theme. So we get this idea that just the world keeps on rolling. everyone keeps on going about their lives. Baltimore never changes, the world never changes. And it's like it can be seen as nihilistic, but it's a realistic portrayal. The Wire is very real. It doesn't pull any punches. It's not going to say things that the real world wouldn't. The real world wouldn't. And it's just fantastic. The truth of that the system is always failing the people that it's supposed to protect. That it's supposed to protect. It might not be set up that way because the system is kind of screwed up in the way that it works. But the people that it claims to protect and promises to, it doesn't do anything for, and people are just as bad off as they were when the show started. We just even in between seasons, like we'll have moments like McNulty and Stringer Bell having an exchange where McNulty says nicely done at the start of season to Stringer, and at the end Stringer says the exact same line to McNulty, and it's just so many little moments of bookending and showing that things are always going to be the same. So next, we're going to discuss one of the reasons why The Wire keeps such a realistic tone throughout its 5 seasons is that it's consistent with real world events. So because The Wire premiered in mid 2002, that was already after 9/11, and the show makes numerous allusions to it. Even in the first episode, we have a line from an FBI agent that McNulty visits where they're discussing and talking about how the FBI no longer is focused on drug trafficking. And he's like, ever since those towers fell, we get this idea that they're really only focused at that point on terrorism, and that there have so few offices actually dedicated to dealing with drug traffickers, which is not what McNulty wants, because he's upset that no one's taking the Barksdale seriously, even though they have tons of bodies on them. And it's just so real and raw, and we're seeing that these guys are supposed to would always be portrayed as good guys, just most of them don't care, or at least aren't focused on things that are happening in these real neighborhoods, like these drug traffickers having drugs on the streets and killing people. And it's just like, well, like, what are you even supposed to do at that point? And I find The Wire is really fun because it had a reputation in real life by its own mayor at the time, Martin O'Malley, who's actually the inspiration for the character of Tommy Carcetti, who is he runs for mayor in the 3rd season when we get our focus on politics. He wants to run for mayor, so he eventually, he has all these ideas of what will make the city great, and gradually we see, as the seasons go on, that he doesn't really have much to do. He's not going to really fix anything. He's just focused on climbing the ladder. We don't really have the idea of whether he actually cared in the first place or it was all just about climbing a ladder. But it's just so real. It's just like, hey, look, these politicians, sometimes they'll say things, but they won't actually follow up on what they're doing, and all they'll care about is climbing a ladder. And we'll get back to Martin O'Malley, who he was the former mayor of Baltimore, and he actually hated the portrayal of the city within the show. I thought the city was portrayed in a negative light, and that it's hilarious because even the testimonies from people at the time actually loved the show because it portrayed them, but the mayor hated it and hated that they filmed there and even asked them to not film there. And I have a direct quote from David Simon I sourced from a Time article where he said, "What happened under his watch as Baltimore's mayor was that he wanted to be governor, and at a certain point, with the crime rate high, he put no faith in real policing," which is so powerful because that's such a major theme of the show, is that there is no real policing. Like, we always get this idea of the good police, like, that's how they call it, good police, like McNulty, who is considered the main, the figurehead for a good police in the show. like David Simon's direct feelings of Martin O'Malley not really caring was just placed directly into Tommy Carcetti, and it's so fantastic the way David Simon would get inspiration from these characters and he would place them directly in the show. Like Snoop Pearson, who I mentioned earlier, was one of Marlowe's new lieutenants. She was a real person, and Michael K. Williams, who played Omar, he met her and he was like, she would be perfect for the show. They brought her in, and she barely even really acted. She was just playing herself, her own street personality, Snoop, and she was one of the best characters on the show, despite not ever being a professional actor. It's just the fact that they were willing to do this on like a show on HBO at the time, which was running The Sopranos. They were willing to just place people on it and have them do their thing. It's just like you wouldn't see that in shows before. Like obviously it's definitely more commonplace now for actors to have their say in their characters, but like at the time this stuff was still brand new. Like shows were still just becoming, prestige TV was just starting. People were just starting to understand how to write these realistic and gritty TV shows, and The Wire really put it all on the table and did all of this. So finally, why do these pieces matter? The show is structured around all of these ideas, all of these characters, all of these real world references into 5 seasons that each focus on a different institution. Season 1 is focused on the police and the drug dealers. It's cops and robbers. We have the idea of the failure of the war on drugs and how it's hurting more people than it helps. Episodes tend to be paced like chapters of a novel because most of the writers were from the book field, from writing novels, and like David Simon was a news reporter, so he's from the literary field, and that's how they would write episodes. That's why they're so differently paced and differently acted and have different structures than any other TV show. So season 1 is the failure in the war on drugs, cops and robbers, the drug dealers. We get glimpses of into the political field near the end of the season, but generally that's where it stays. It tries to be this gritty cop show that isn't like anything else and shows us why the world truly isn't like we think, and how cop shows just aren't like that. Obviously, like there's something like The Shield, which was a gritty cop show, would come out, and The Wire isn't quite as like these cops are like these brutalizing gangs. Like obviously we still get tons of moments of police brutality just in the first season. Like we have Herc, Carver, and Prez Belusky, 3 officers that are considered to be loudmouths and violent, go into the projects late at night and instigate a fight, and one kid gets his eye popped out. He gets his eye smashed by the blunt end of Perez's weapon and loses an eye. This child loses an eye just because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it's like, obviously people would say, oh, he instigated because he was on the cop's car. But even then, what's the excuse for a grown man to go after a 14-year-old with the blunt end of a weapon? Like there is no reason to do that. None. They were there at the wrong place just trying to pick a fight, and they got shown why it was wrong. Eventually Carver does learn and becomes a better police officer later in the show, but Herc ends up just never learning. Prez becomes a teacher, and he's the character I mentioned earlier about Ed Burns being a police officer turned teacher. Excuse me. That would be Prez. That's Prez's basic story throughout the show. I don't really want to get into the exact specifics because, again, I only want to keep the spoilers decently light. I've mentioned a pretty couple major ones, but I don't really want to do season 1 with those characters is generally that, and has some great moments, some great characters, some very sad moments, especially with Wallace, which I'll get into mostly soon, mostly the next episode. We even have that scene, the reason like you see the chessboard on my like logo and why I mentioned all the pieces matter. There's a chessboard scene with D'Angelo, who's the nephew of Avon, teaching the Pit Boys about how the game works. And it's just so great. Like we have the show have these metaphorical chess beats that it knocks down throughout the seasons. That's how the first couple episodes are building up and placing the chess pieces down, and the later episodes are knocking them down and showing us the aftermath and all the characters' reactions to it. Generally, like the penultimate episode will be the big climax, and then we'll have the final episode be like, here's how everyone's life has changed now, or not changed at all. And we'll have that final montage be like a goodbye to that institution. Season 2. Season 2 is the hard one to talk about because it can be polarizing for some, because it starts out showing us a mostly white set of dock workers, despite season 1 being all about the projects and all about showing black lives and how they live every day and the poverty they face in the inner city. Season 2, we still get a focus on the Barksdale organization, but they're definitely more of a side story, a B story. But the union workers are investigated by the police because of some petty beef by a police major. Just some petty beef the police major has with Stan Valchek has with Frank Sabatka, who's like the new, not main, but like definitely of the Doc storyline. He's definitely the big main guy. And it's all about the death of the working class, which is season 2's theme, and that's what makes season 2 so good, despite some of the mixed reviews it has. Most people eventually realize how good season 2 is. It's about the death of the working class and how people are losing jobs and people are unable to work, and that's why people turn to drug dealing and drugs, is because what other option do they have to make a living for themselves? Like, it's meant to be this true blunt look that it doesn't. It's more of a class thing than racing. Obviously, there is race that plays into it with systemic racism and all that, and The Wire shows that in spades with how racist some of the police officers are and how these people just can't catch a break. But we see how class plays into it too with these poor white dock workers, these poor white Polish dock workers that get screwed over and have to eventually more and more turn to crime. They get screwed by the end. Frank doesn't meet a very happy end. The Greeks, who were the villains who I mentioned earlier, being these mysterious white baddies that never get caught. They never get... The Greek and his main enforcer, Spiros Vandopoulos, never get caught. They flee the country. They eventually do come back, but they never face charges for any of the murders, the human trafficking that we see, the 14 women in the container that get killed. They never face the charges for that, for the human trafficking or the drug trafficking or any of the other things they do. Season 3 is more basically a return to form of season 1, but it's more, we get a zoom out for the politics. We get the people at the hall, like Tommy Carcetti, who's a councilman that wants to run for mayor. We get his story. We get back to the streets of the Barksdales, but then they feud with the Stanfield, like Marlo Stanfield get feuds with Avon Barksdale and Stringer Bell. And we eventually see the fallout where finally the major crimes unit, the people doing the wiretaps, the investigations, finally can bring down Avon and Stringer after they turn on each other, and Marlo rises as the new kingpin of the West Side. That's season 3. It's meant to be this war between them, but also the struggling of major crimes and some like people like McNulty hitting a new low. We see the political side where Tommy Carcetti wants to climb a ladder, but he has some great ideas that he wants to help the city with as the murder rates rise. It's definitely one of the best seasons. I think it's probably the second best. But I'll get into that more about which seasons I like the most. Season 4, we're seeing the schools, so we're seeing we're seeing these children. We're seeing something below the street level. We saw the adults and their actions, but now we're seeing how these kids turn. Season 4 becomes this extremely dark and sad story for anyone that struggles watching kids suffer. Season 4 is a rough one, but it's definitely one of the show's best. It's absolute peak fiction, but it's so realistic and so it does not pull punches. It keeps everything the most realistic it possibly can be. It's sad, it's dark, but at times it's funny. We're following kids, of course. Of course, they're going to have a sense of humor. Of course, they're going to do what they can to make it through their life. Some of them poorer than others, like Dookie, who lives in a house with no running water, and it can be really sad. Bubbles reaches his low, like when I talked about he hangs himself at the end of the season because of Prodigy. He accidentally got killed. It's just some real dark stuff. The Major Crimes Unit is screwed. They're basically not there anymore. Everyone either leaves to a new unit like Homicide or just works under a lieutenant that doesn't care and doesn't want them to do their investigations like they used to. But finally, season 5, it's probably, other than season 2, it's the most polarizing because of the fake serial killer storyline that McNulty makes up so they can catch Marlowe. I personally don't believe it's really that bad. Obviously, it has its faults and it's probably the lowest quality season overall, but that's not saying much when it comes to The Wire. It's not like something like the end of The Office or the last few seasons of Game of Thrones that really tend to shit the bed a little bit at times. It's not like that. It's just more of a, this could have been better, but you can really blame HBO and not giving them the full 12 or 13 episodes and only gave them 10 to completely wrap up a story. Most shows have extended final seasons, but not The Wire didn't get that, sadly. But it really doesn't change much. It still has a banger ending. The ending's great. It really shows that everything coming full circle. It really wraps everything up great. All the characters get pretty much the ending they deserve, generally. But the ones that don't really get screwed. We see Bubbles get a happy ending, but we see the kids, we eventually finally see the end of their storylines, and they don't really turn out that great, sadly. But it's the 5 seasons. Season 5 is meant to be the media, where we get the view of the media and how they season 5 aged really well because of how we talk about these days, how the media sensationalizes stories. And The Wire did this in 2008, back when there was still like less of an important thing. Like now we really see how the media sensationalizes stories and how, like, the term fake news, I hate that term because of its connotations, but generally we see how like clickbait and stuff work. The Wire tackled this years before it really started becoming a mainstream thing, and it aged fantastically because of it. We see the media creates the storylines and gets people worried about something that doesn't even exist, but not focusing on the real poverty and the real suffering out there. And that's what makes season 5 worth it for me. And I don't see it being worse than the rest of the show, other than a few little minor nitpicks I have. But other than that, it's fantastically ended, and season 5 works, and it's absolutely a necessary part. Again, all the pieces matter. The show is fantastic in every way. Fine details are meant to be remembered. If you miss something, you're probably, for a world of hurt. If you miss really anything ever, like event in season 1, like John Bailey, who was part of Omar's crew, along with Brandon, ends up getting shot and killed, but we don't actually see it. We only hear about it after the fact in the homicide office, where they talk about a body of John Bailey, and then later Omar ends up finding out from McNulty, who heard that info and related to Omar, but we don't, we just have to know that that's his name. We have to pick up those little details there and connect the dots of 2 different sides of the story, where Omar hears about Omar's wearing where Bailey is and he's wondering why he's gone, and then later finds out. Like, stuff like that is littered throughout The Wire. You have to remember this stuff. And that's why so many rewatches are good, because it's hard the first time. Like, you can miss stuff. I missed stuff my first time. Entire storylines made less sense to me the first time. Until I rewatch, I'm like, that makes so much sense now. These characters doing this stuff makes sense. And it really makes the theme of The Wire about, like, higher ups incompetence, the police not doing their jobs, and people suffering under poverty, the drug dealers basically being the only avenue for money, the addicts suffering and no one really doing anything about him, Bubbles getting constantly screwed over until he finally triumphs. Just make this show so rewatchable, but also so important. We're telling a story of people that are suffering under our noses and we don't care. The homeless are suffering, the addicts are suffering, those in poverty suffering in inner cities. Like, just the lack of education, people being drawn into the illegal drug trade, people being arrested, people being killed unjustly. It's so powerful. And it tells such a fantastic story while also giving people the info that might not understand the stuff. It's so raw. I think I've yapped long enough, so let's give a little teaser for next episode. I want to, in the next episode, go into the individual seasons themselves. So the big spoilers of all the major events of the seasons will be next episode. And with those spoilers in mind, at the end, I will do my season ranking. I did mention a season that I really liked, but I want to do my full season ranking, talk why they're ranked that way next time. So this has been Billy Jirak with All in the Game, a Wire podcast. Thanks.